I thought my marriage was perfect, until one drive changed everything. She was the kind of woman who made every room brighter just by walking into it, and I often wondered how I had been lucky enough to call her my wife. Her smile carried a warmth that could soften even the hardest of days, and her laughter had a way of making the world feel lighter. When I looked at her, I saw not just beauty, but a calm strength that steadied me in ways I could never fully explain. To me, she was flawless, not because she was perfect in every detail, but because she was perfect for me. Our marriage felt like something out of a story people told with envy. Friends would often comment on how we seemed inseparable, how we carried ourselves with a quiet harmony that others longed for. I never tired of hearing those remarks, not because I wanted to boast, but because they reminded me of how rare and precious our bond was. We had built a life together that felt untouchable, as though no storm could shake the foundation we had laid. She had a kindness that went beyond simple gestures. It was in the way she listened when I spoke, never rushing me, never dismissing my thoughts. It was in the way she remembered the smallest details about people, making them feel seen and valued. That kindness wasn't just for me, it was for everyone she met, and it made me proud to stand beside her. I often thought that if the world had more people like her, it would be a gentler place. Grace seemed to follow her naturally, not just in the way she moved, but in the way she carried herself through life. She had a patience that I lacked, a calmness that balanced my restless energy. When I stumbled, she steadied me. When I doubted myself, she reminded me of my worth. She was not only my partner, but also my anchor, the one who kept me grounded when everything else felt uncertain. Our home reflected the love we shared. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of safety. Every corner carried a memory. Meals cooked together, late-night conversations, quiet mornings with coffee in hand. These small, ordinary moments became extraordinary because they were ours. I often thought that if happiness could be bottled, it would look like the life we had built together. I adored the way she made even the simplest routines feel meaningful. A drive to the grocery store became a chance to share stories and jokes. Folding laundry together turned into playful banter. She had a way of turning the mundane into something memorable. And it made me realize that joy wasn't found in grand gestures, but in the everyday moments we shared. People often asked us what our secret was, how we managed to keep our marriage so strong. I never had a complicated answer. It was simply that I loved her deeply, and she loved me in return. We respected each other, trusted each other, and never stopped choosing each other day after day. That was the heart of it, and it felt so simple, yet so rare. There were times I would catch myself just watching her, marveling at the life we had created. She could be reading a book, cooking dinner, or simply sitting quietly, and I would feel overwhelmed with gratitude. It was as if I had stumbled into a dream I never wanted to wake from. She wasn't just my wife, she was my safe place, my constant, my everything. I often thought about how others might see us, and I knew they saw a couple who had it all. But what they couldn't see was the depth of my admiration for her, the way she shaped my world without even trying. She wasn't just part of my life. She was the center of it, the reason everything else made sense. With her, I felt complete in a way I never had before. If love could be measured, mine for her would have no limits. She was the person I turned to in joy and in sorrow, the one who made every victory sweeter and every hardship bearable. To me, she was flawless, and our marriage was the kind of love story people dreamed of. I believed nothing could ever touch what we had, that our bond was unbreakable, and that the picture we had painted together would last forever. The day began like any other, with the kind of quiet comfort that comes from routine. We decided to take the car out for a simple errand, nothing remarkable, just a drive to a place we had been countless times before. The sun was soft in the sky, the kind of light that makes everything look gentler, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. She sat beside me, humming faintly to a tune on the radio, her hand resting lightly on her lap. It was such an ordinary moment, yet with her there, it felt like something worth remembering. I didn't know this drive would change everything. The car had always been a place where we shared some of our best conversations. There was something about the road stretching ahead, the world passing by outside the windows, that made us both open up in ways we didn't at home. That day was no different. She asked me about work, about the little frustrations I'd been carrying, and she listened with the same patience she always did. I found myself smiling as I spoke, not because of what I was saying, but because of the way she made me feel heard. I glanced at her as I drove, catching the way the sunlight touched her face, and I thought again how lucky I was. Even in silence, she had a way of filling the space with warmth. The hum of the engine, the rhythm of the tires on the road, and her presence beside me created a kind of harmony that felt unshakable. I believed in that moment that nothing could disturb the life we had built, that we were untouchable in our little world. She reached over and adjusted the air vent, a small, ordinary gesture, but even that seemed graceful to me. I laughed softly, teasing her about always needing the perfect temperature, and she rolled her eyes in that playful way I adored. These were the moments I cherished most, the small, fleeting exchanges that made our life together feel so alive. I thought to myself that if happiness had a sound, it would be her laughter filling the car. The road stretched ahead, familiar and uneventful, but I found myself savoring every second. I thought about how many times we had driven this way together, how many conversations and memories were tied to these streets. Each drive felt like a thread in the fabric of our marriage, weaving together the ordinary into something extraordinary. I didn't realize then that this particular drive would unravel that fabric in ways I couldn't imagine. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes half closed, and began telling me a story from her childhood. I loved when she did that, sharing pieces of herself that made me feel closer to her. I listened intently, laughing at the funny parts, asking questions, and marveling at how even after all these years, she could still surprise me with new details. It felt like we were still discovering each other, still building something fresh and alive. The car became a cocoon, shielding us from the outside world. It was just the two of us, the road, and the steady rhythm of our voices. I thought about how many people longed for this kind of connection, how rare it was to find someone who could make even the most ordinary day feel like a gift. I told myself, not for the first time, that I would never take her for granted. As we drove, I found myself reflecting on how much she had shaped my life. She wasn't just my wife. She was my compass, my anchor, the person who gave meaning to everything else. I thought about the years behind us and the years ahead, and I felt a deep sense of peace. I couldn't imagine a future without her by my side. That certainty was so strong, so absolute, that it never occurred to me it could be shaken. The conversation drifted to plans for the weekend, small things like what we might cook or whether we should visit friends. It was the kind of talk that seemed unimportant at the time, but in truth, it was everything. These little plans, these shared decisions, were the building blocks of our life together. I smiled as she spoke, thinking how lucky I was to have a partner who made even the smallest choices feel meaningful. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was to the weight of that moment. To me, it was just another drive, another ordinary day with the woman I adored. But hidden in the flow of conversation, in the ease of our laughter, was something I didn't yet see. A truth was waiting, just ahead, ready to shatter the picture I had painted of us. I didn't know this drive would change everything, but it did. Her voice was light when she said it, almost as if the words had slipped out without thought, carried on the rhythm of our easy conversation. We were talking about nothing important, weekend plans, the errands we had to run, when suddenly she mentioned a detail that didn't fit. It was small, almost invisible, but it caught me off guard. She spoke of a place she claimed she had never been, yet described it with the kind of familiarity that only comes from experience. I chuckled at first, teasing her about her slip of the tongue, but something in her tone made me pause. I told myself it was nothing, just a mistake anyone could make. After all, we had shared so many stories over the years, and sometimes memories blur together. But as I glanced at her, I noticed the way she quickly looked out the window, as if avoiding my eyes. It was such a subtle gesture, one I might have ignored on any other day. But in that moment, it felt heavy. I laughed again, trying to brush it off, but the sound of my own laughter rang hollow in my ears. The car filled with silence for a few seconds, the kind that doesn't feel natural. She shifted in her seat, adjusting her scarf, and then changed the subject with practiced ease. I followed her lead, not wanting to spoil the mood, but the words she had spoken replayed in my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. I told myself not to overthink it, yet the thought lingered, scratching at the edges of my certainty. I had always believed I knew her better than anyone, that there were no secrets between us. But in that moment, a tiny crack appeared in the picture I had painted of her. It was nothing more than a casual remark, but it didn't match the woman I thought I knew. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, but the unease it stirred refused to fade. As we drove on, I found myself studying her more closely, noticing every movement, every pause, every shift in her tone. She seemed the same as always, calm, graceful, warm. But now I wondered if I had missed something all along. Could it be that she carried pieces of herself I had never seen? The thought unsettled me, though I tried to bury it beneath the comfort of routine. I forced myself to smile, to keep the conversation light, but inside I was unsettled. It was as if a shadow had crept into the car, invisible yet undeniable. I wanted to dismiss it, to return to the certainty I had always felt, but the seed had been planted. And once a seed is planted, it has a way of growing, no matter how much you try to ignore it. She laughed at something I said, her voice as warm as ever, and for a moment I almost believed everything was fine. But even as I smiled back, I felt a distance between us that hadn't been there before. It wasn't her fault, not really. It was just a few careless words, but they had opened a door in my mind that I couldn't close. The road stretched ahead, unchanged, but I no longer felt the same ease I had at the start of the drive. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, my thoughts circling back to her slip again and again. It was such a small thing, yet it carried the weight of something larger, something I couldn't yet name. I told myself I was being foolish, that love meant trust, and trust meant letting go of doubts. But the truth was, I couldn't let it go. Her words had lodged themselves in me, quiet but sharp, and I knew they would stay there until I found an answer. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything began to change. Not in a dramatic way, not with shouting or tears, but with a single careless remark that didn't belong. I adored my wife, but in that instant, I began to wonder if I truly knew her at all. Her words echoed in my mind long after they had left her lips, circling back again and again like a song I couldn't silence. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just a slip, a careless remark that meant little, but the more I thought about it, the more it refused to fade. I replayed the moment in my head, the way her voice had sounded, the casual tone, the way she had looked out the window as if the world outside suddenly demanded her attention. It was ordinary on the surface, yet something about it felt wrong, and I couldn't let it go. I tried to laugh at myself, to dismiss the unease as paranoia. After all, hadn't she always been honest with me? Hadn't our marriage been built on trust, on the kind of openness others envied? But the thought lingered. If it was just a joke, why hadn't she laughed? If it was a mistake, why hadn't she corrected herself? The silence that followed her words seemed heavier than the words themselves, and that silence haunted me. As the miles passed beneath the tires, I found myself dissecting every detail of that moment. The way her hand shifted in her lap, the way her eyes avoided mine, the way she changed the subject so quickly. I told myself I was overanalyzing, but deep down I knew I wasn't. Something had slipped through the cracks, something she hadn't meant for me to hear, and now it was lodged in my mind like a splinter. I thought back to all the times I had trusted her without question, all the moments when her word had been enough to silence any doubt. That trust had been my foundation, the thing that made our marriage feel unshakable. But now, with just a few careless words, that foundation felt less certain. It was as if I had been staring at a flawless painting only to notice a tiny crack in the corner. Once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more tangled my thoughts became. Maybe she had simply misspoken. Maybe she had been tired, distracted, not thinking clearly. But then again, maybe it was the truth, a truth she had never meant to reveal. The possibilities twisted in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. I wanted to believe in the woman I adored, but doubt had already taken root. I caught myself glancing at her, searching for reassurance in her face. She looked calm, even content, as if nothing had happened. That should have comforted me, but instead it made me uneasy. How could she be so at ease when I felt so unsettled? Was it because there was nothing to worry about, or because she had grown skilled at hiding what she didn't want me to see? The drive continued, but I was no longer present. My hands gripped the wheel. My eyes watched the road, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying her words over and over. Each repetition seemed to shift their meaning, as if the truth was hiding in the spaces between them. I wanted to ask her again, to press for clarity, but fear held me back. What if I didn't like the answer? By the time we reached our destination, I had convinced myself of a dozen different explanations, none of them satisfying. The words lingered like smoke, impossible to grasp, yet impossible to ignore. I smiled at her, forced and thin, hoping she wouldn't notice the storm inside me. She returned the smile easily, and that ease only deepened my unease. That night, as I lay beside her, I found no peace. Her breathing was steady, calm, as if she carried no weight at all. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing her words again and again. They had been so small, so casual, yet they had cracked something inside me. The illusion of perfection I had held so tightly was beginning to crumble, and I couldn't stop it. Looking back, I realized that was the true beginning of the unraveling. Not the words themselves, but the way they took root in me, the way they refused to let go. I adored my wife, but in that moment, I began to see her differently. Not as flawless, not as untouchable, but as someone who might be hiding truths I wasn't ready to face. And once that thought entered my mind, there was no turning back. That evening, when the house was quiet and the day's errands were behind us, I decided to bring it up. I didn't want to sound suspicious or accusing, so I slipped it into the conversation as casually as I could. You know, earlier in the car, you mentioned that place, I said with a smile, trying to keep my tone light. I thought you'd never been there. I expected her to laugh, to wave it off with some simple explanation that would put my mind at ease. Instead, she hesitated just for a moment, and that pause felt louder than any answer she could have given. She tilted her head, her expression calm but unreadable, and said, "Oh, did I? I must have been thinking of something else." Her voice was smooth, practiced even, as though she had rehearsed the art of brushing things aside. Then, without missing a beat, she shifted the conversation to dinner plans, asking if I wanted to try a new recipe she had found. It was so seamless, so effortless, that anyone else might have let it go. But I couldn't. I laughed softly, pretending to accept her answer, but inside I felt a tightening in my chest. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. The words were vague, the kind of explanation that left more questions than answers. And the way she moved on so quickly, as if the subject wasn't worth lingering on, made me feel as though I had stumbled onto something she didn't want me to see. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into a harmless slip. But the unease wouldn't leave me. Her reaction hadn't reassured me. It had unsettled me further. If there was nothing to hide, why not laugh it off? Why not explain it more clearly? Instead, she had chosen to bury it under small talk, and that choice spoke louder than her words. As we sat together, discussing recipes and weekend errands, I found myself watching her more closely. Every smile, every gesture, every glance felt like a performance I was suddenly questioning. Had I been blind all this time, seeing only what I wanted to see? Or was this just a moment of paranoia, a trick of my own mind? The doubt gnawed at me, quiet but relentless. Later, when she leaned against me on the couch, her warmth pressed against my side, I should have felt comforted. But instead, I felt a strange distance, as though there was a wall between us that hadn't been there before. Her presence was the same, her affection unchanged, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The illusion of perfection I had always believed in was beginning to feel fragile. I thought about pressing her again, asking more directly, but fear held me back. What if she grew defensive? What if she gave me an answer I wasn't ready to hear? It was easier, in that moment, to let her words hang in the air unanswered, to pretend everything was fine. But deep down I knew it wasn't. Her vague reply replayed in my mind long after the conversation had ended. It was like a puzzle piece that didn't fit, no matter how I turned it. I wanted to believe her, to trust her as I always had, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. And once doubt begins to grow, it's hard to stop. That night, as she drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay awake, staring into the dark. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, as though she carried no weight at all. But I carried it for both of us. The unease, the questions, the quiet fear that maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought. Looking back, I realized that was the moment the balance shifted. I had asked lightly, hoping for reassurance, but instead I was left with more uncertainty than before. She had brushed it off, changed the subject, and in doing so, she had deepened the crack in the picture I had once believed was flawless. Would you like me to take part 6, The Diary of Doubt, into a more slow, creeping paranoia style, where he notices small inconsistencies everywhere, or a sharper investigative tone, where he actively starts looking for proof? It began with the smallest of things, details so minor that on any other day I would have brushed them aside. She told me she had spent the afternoon at the market, yet later mentioned running into a friend at a cafe across town. At first, I thought nothing of it. People forget, stories overlap. But now, after that slip in the car, I found myself listening more closely. The inconsistencies were faint, like cracks in glass, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. Her laughter, once the sound that anchored me, began to feel rehearsed. I noticed how it came a beat too late, or how her eyes didn't always match the warmth in her voice. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was letting paranoia twist what was real, but the doubt had already taken root. Every gesture, every word, became something to analyze, a puzzle piece that might reveal a truth I wasn't ready to face. Even her kindness, the very thing I had always admired, began to feel different. When she asked about my day, I wondered if she was truly listening or just playing a part. When she smiled at me, I questioned whether it was love or habit. These were thoughts I had never allowed myself before. But now they came uninvited, whispering in the back of my mind. The car moment became the lens through which I reinterpreted everything. I thought back to stories she had told me years ago about places she had never been, people she had never met. Suddenly, I wasn't so sure. Had I been blind all along, too eager to believe in the perfect picture I had painted of her? Or had she been careful, weaving her words in ways that kept me from seeing the truth? I began to notice how often she changed the subject when I asked certain questions, how her tone shifted when I pressed too close. Before, I would have admired her grace in steering conversations, but now it felt like evasion. What once seemed charming now felt suspicious, and I hated myself for thinking that way. Yet I couldn't stop. At night, lying beside her, I replayed every conversation in my mind. I searched for patterns, for hidden meanings in her words. I remembered the way she had looked out the window during that drive, her silence heavy, her answer vague. It was as if that moment had unlocked a door, and now I was walking through rooms I had never known existed in our marriage. I told myself I loved her, that love meant trust, but trust no longer came easily. I found myself watching her more closely, studying her expressions, her pauses, her slips. I wanted to believe in her, to hold on to the certainty I once had, but the cracks were spreading and I couldn't ignore them. The more I searched for reassurance, the less I found. Every inconsistency, no matter how small, became evidence in my mind. I didn't confront her again, not yet, but I carried the weight of those doubts like a secret diary written only in my thoughts. Each page filled itself with questions I couldn't answer, fears I couldn't silence. I wondered if she noticed the change in me, if she sensed the distance growing. She still leaned against me, still smiled, still spoke with the same warmth, but I was no longer the same man beside her. I was listening differently, watching differently, and in doing so, I was pulling away without meaning to. Looking back, I realized that was when the illusion truly began to crumble. Not because of anything she confessed, but because of the way I started to see her. The car moment had planted the seed, but it was my own mind that watered it, turning suspicion into certainty. And once that diary of doubt had begun to write itself, there was no way to close it again. I chose to bring it up with my brother one evening, over coffee at the small cafe we often visited. I didn't want to sound dramatic, so I framed it lightly, almost as if I were sharing a funny story. "She said something odd in the car the other day," I began, stirring my cup slowly. "It didn't make sense, but maybe I'm just overthinking." He listened quietly, his eyes narrowing just slightly, and that silence unsettled me more than any words could. I expected him to laugh, to tell me I was being ridiculous, but instead he leaned back in his chair and said, "You've always trusted her. Don't let one slip ruin that." His words were meant to comfort, but his tone carried a hesitation I couldn't ignore. It was as if he wanted to believe what he was saying, but wasn't entirely convinced himself. That hesitation lodged itself in my chest like a stone. I pressed him gently, asking if he had ever noticed anything strange. He shook his head quickly, too quickly, and said, "No, nothing at all. She's wonderful." But the way he avoided my eyes told a different story. It was the kind of denial that felt rehearsed, the kind that suggested he had thought about it before. My heart sank as I realized I wasn't the only one who had sensed something. The conversation drifted to safer topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back. Every pause, every shift in his expression seemed to confirm my worst fears. If even he, someone who had always admired her, carried doubts he wouldn't voice, then maybe I wasn't imagining things after all. On the way home, his words replayed in my mind, but it wasn't the reassurance I remembered. It was the hesitation. The tiny crack in his voice, that flicker in his eyes, became proof in my mind. Proof that there was more beneath the surface, something I hadn't yet uncovered. When I walked through the door and saw her smile, I wanted to believe it was genuine, that I was simply letting paranoia twist everything. But the seed had grown roots, and now it was spreading. Her smile no longer felt like comfort. It felt like a mask I couldn't see behind. I tried to push the thoughts away, to remind myself of the years we had shared, the love we had built. But the more I tried, the stronger the doubts became. It was as if my brother's hesitation had given them permission to grow, to take shape in ways I couldn't control. That night, I found myself watching her more closely than ever. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, I measured against the image of the woman I thought I knew. And every time I found myself wondering if I was seeing her true self or just the version she wanted me to see. The paranoia grew quietly, like a shadow stretching across the room. I didn't confront her, not yet, but I carried the weight of suspicion everywhere I went. It colored my thoughts, my memories, even my dreams. What had once been a perfect picture was now a puzzle with missing pieces. Looking back, I realized that conversation with my brother didn't calm me. It confirmed my fears. His hesitation was all it took to turn doubt into obsession. And from that moment on, I wasn't just questioning her words in the car. I was questioning everything. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where I wasn't looking for anything at all. I'd gone to fetch a pen from the drawer in the study, the one where we kept odds and ends, old receipts, spare keys, forgotten scraps of paper. That was when I saw it, folded neatly between envelopes. A receipt, dated only a few weeks ago, from a restaurant I had never been to. The name was unfamiliar, but the address was clear, and it was nowhere near the places she usually went. My first thought was simple. Maybe she had gone with a friend. But then I noticed the time, late evening, a night she had told me she was home with a headache. I held the slip of paper in my hand, staring at the ink as though it might rearrange itself into something harmless. It wasn't proof of anything, not really. People go out, people forget to mention things. But the detail gnawed at me. Why hadn't she said anything? Why had she chosen to tell me she was home instead? The receipt was small, flimsy, but it carried a weight that pressed down on me. I slipped it back into the drawer, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Yet as I walked away, I felt the same unease I had felt in the car that day. Her words, her tone, her evasions, they all seemed to point towards something I couldn't quite name. The receipt became another piece of the puzzle, one that didn't fit the picture I had always believed in. Later, as we sat together at dinner, I found myself studying her more closely. She spoke with the same warmth, laughed at the same moments, but I couldn't stop thinking about that slip of paper. It was as if it had burned itself into my mind, a quiet reminder that there were parts of her life I didn't know. I wanted to ask her about it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and smiled, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. The receipt wasn't just a receipt. It was a symbol, proof that there were cracks in the story I had told myself about us. It didn't prove betrayal, but it proved something else, that I didn't know her as completely as I thought. And that realization was almost worse. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. I thought about the restaurant, about who she might have been with, about why she hadn't told me. My mind spun in circles, creating scenarios, each one darker than the last. The more I tried to silence the thoughts, the louder they became. I told myself I was being unfair, that marriage was built on trust, that one receipt didn't mean anything. But the truth was, it meant everything. It meant that the illusion of perfection I had clung to was no longer whole. It had been fractured, and no matter how much I tried to piece it back together, the crack would always remain. The next morning, I watched her move through the kitchen, graceful and calm, as though nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I couldn't look at her without seeing the receipt in my mind, without wondering what else she hadn't told me. The life we shared no longer felt untouchable. It felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any moment. I carried the secret with me, tucked away like the receipt itself, hidden but heavy. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I let the doubt grow, feeding it with every glance, every word, every silence. The evidence wasn't enough to accuse, but it was enough to change me. Looking back, I know that was the moment the illusion truly broke. Not because I had proof of betrayal, but because I no longer believed in the story I had built around us. The receipt was just paper, but it carried the weight of truth. The woman I adored might not be the woman I thought she was. I waited until the evening, when the silence of the house made it impossible to ignore the weight pressing on my chest. I couldn't carry the questions any longer. Sitting across from her at the table, I leaned forward and asked, more firmly this time, "That thing you said in the car, what did you mean by it?" My voice was calm, but beneath it was a sharp edge I couldn't hide. She froze for a moment, her fork hovering above her plate, before setting it down with deliberate care. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she gave a small, dismissive laugh. "You're still thinking about that?" It was nothing. "You're making too much of it." Her tone was sharper than before, not playful or light, but defensive. The words were meant to close the door, but instead they opened it wider. I felt my pulse quicken, because if it truly was nothing, why did she sound so irritated? I pressed again, unwilling to let it slip away this time. "It didn't sound like nothing. You spoke about that place like you knew it, and then you brushed it off. Why?" My words hung in the air, heavier than I intended. She shifted in her chair, her face tightening, and for the first time I saw anger flicker in her eyes. "Why are you interrogating me?" she snapped. "Do you not trust me anymore?" Her reaction stung, but it also fueled my unease. I hadn't accused her of anything, not directly, yet she reacted as if I had. I tried to steady my voice, to keep it from breaking. "I just want to understand. That's all. Because the way you said it didn't sound like a mistake." The moment I said it, I saw her flinch, just slightly. As though I had touched a nerve she didn't want exposed, she stood abruptly, gathering the plates, though the meal was unfinished. "I don't have to explain every word I say," she muttered, her back to me. "If you're going to twist everything, then maybe the problem isn't me." Her voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath it. I sat there, stunned, watching her move about the kitchen with a precision that felt more like avoidance than routine. The car moment replayed in my mind, sharper now, her words echoing with new meaning. At the time, I had thought it was a slip, a careless remark. But now, after seeing her reaction, it felt like something else entirely, a confession in disguise, one she hadn't meant for me to catch. The way she avoided my eyes, the way she deflected, the way she turned the blame back on me, it all pointed to a truth she wasn't ready to admit. I wanted to push harder, to demand answers, but fear held me back. Fear of what I might uncover, fear of shattering the fragile picture I was still clinging to. So instead, I sat in silence, my questions burning inside me, while she busied herself with dishes that didn't need washing. The distance between us had never felt wider. When she finally returned to the table, her expression was calm again, almost too calm, as if she'd put on a mask. "Can we not do this?" she asked softly. "Can we just move on?" Her words were gentle, but they carried the weight of finality, a plea to bury the moment and never dig it up again. I nodded, though my heart screamed against it. That night, lying beside her, I couldn't stop hearing her voice in the car. The casual tone, the familiarity in her words, the silence that followed. It all came back with new clarity. What once seemed like nothing now felt like everything. I realized then that the truth wasn't just hiding in her words. It was hiding in her reactions, in the way she fought so hard to keep me from looking closer. Looking back, I know that confrontation didn't give me answers. It gave me more questions. But it also gave me something else, the certainty that the woman I adored was keeping something from me. And once I knew that, there was no going back. It was late one evening when the truth finally revealed itself, not through a dramatic confession, but through something far quieter, almost mundane. I had been searching for a document in her desk when I found a small envelope tucked beneath a stack of old letters. My first instinct was to put it back, to respect her privacy. The weight of weeks of doubt pressed me forward. Inside was a photograph. Her, standing close beside a man I had never seen before, their smiles too intimate to be casual. On the back, in her handwriting, were words that made my heart stop. "For the nights we couldn't share, but always dreamed of." I stared at the photograph until the edges blurred, my hands trembling as though I were holding something poisonous. It wasn't just the image, it was the realization that everything I thought I knew about her, about us, was suddenly in question. The car moment, her slip of the tongue, her evasions, they all came rushing back, reframed now as pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see. She hadn't simply misspoken. She had revealed a truth she had been carrying all along, one I had been too blind or too trusting to recognize. When she came into the room and saw me holding the photograph, her face drained of color. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavier than any argument could have been. Finally, she whispered, "It's not what you think." But the words rang hollow because I already knew it was exactly what I thought. The photograph was proof, not just of a hidden past, but of a secret life that had run parallel to ours. I felt something inside me collapse, as though the foundation of my world had been pulled out from under me. The woman I had adored, the woman I had built my life around, was suddenly a stranger. Every memory, every moment we had shared, now felt tainted. I thought of our drives, our laughter, our quiet nights together, and wondered how many of them had been real, and how many had been shadows of a truth she never told me. Anger surged through me, hot and sharp, but it was quickly followed by grief so heavy it nearly crushed me. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood there in numb silence, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing I had been living in an illusion. The love I had carried so fiercely now felt like a wound, raw and open. She tried to explain, her voice trembling, but I couldn't hear her. Every word sounded like another lie, another layer of deception. I turned away, unable to look at her, because the sight of her face, the face I had once cherished, now felt like a mask I could no longer trust. That night, I sat, alone in the dark, the photograph on the table before me. I traced the handwriting on the back, the words that had shattered everything, and I felt hollow. The man in the picture wasn't just someone from her past. He was the ghost that had been haunting our marriage all along. And now that I had seen him, I couldn't unsee him. The car ride replayed in my mind, sharper than ever. Her slip, her evasions, her defensiveness, it had all been pointing here to this truth. What I had dismissed as paranoia was, in fact, my instincts clawing at the surface of something real. I had wanted so badly to believe in her perfection that I ignored the cracks until they split wide open. By morning, I no longer felt anger. I no longer felt grief. I felt nothing at all. Numbness had taken its place, a cold emptiness where love had once lived. I looked at her across the breakfast table, and though she sat there as she always had, she was no longer my wife in the way I had believed. She was someone else entirely, someone I had never truly known. Looking back, I realized that was the breaking point, not the photograph itself, but the way it reframed everything. Our marriage, our love, our life together, it had all been built on an illusion. And once the truth was uncovered, there was no way to return to the man I had been before. The adoration I once carried had turned to ashes, leaving only silence in its place. The days that followed were a blur of contradictions, my heart torn between the woman I had adored and the woman who had deceived me. I would catch myself remembering her laughter, the way she once made the world feel lighter, and for a fleeting moment I longed to believe in that version of her again. But then the photograph would return to my mind, her handwriting etched into my memory, and the warmth I felt would collapse into cold disbelief. It was as though I was living with two different women, one who had been my anchor and one who had been a stranger all along. Friends and family quickly sensed the shift between us. Some urged me to forgive, to remember the years of love and devotion, to see the mistake as human rather than unforgivable. They reminded me of the life we had built, the memories we had shared, and the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. Others, however, were less forgiving. They told me betrayal was betrayal, no matter how it was dressed, and that trust, once broken, could never be restored. Their voices clashed in my mind, amplifying the storm already raging inside me. My brother, who had once hesitated when I first confided in him, now spoke more openly. "You deserve the truth," he said firmly. "Don't let her rewrite it. Don't let her make you doubt what you already know." His words carried weight, but they also deepened my conflict, because even as I agreed with him, I couldn't silence the part of me that still longed for her, still wanted to believe in the woman I had loved so fiercely. At night, the bed felt colder, even though she still lay beside me. I would turn to look at her, searching for the woman I once knew, but all I saw was the mask of someone who had hidden too much. She tried to reach for me, to bridge the distance, but I pulled away, unsure if her touch was real or just another performance. The intimacy we once shared had become a battlefield of silence and suspicion. Family dinners became tense, conversations strained. Some relatives avoided the subject entirely, pretending nothing had changed, while others whispered their judgments when they thought I couldn't hear. I felt caught between two worlds, the one where I was still her husband, and the one where I was a fool for staying. The weight of their opinions pressed down on me, but in the end, I knew the decision was mine alone. I tried to imagine forgiveness, to picture a future where I could look past the betrayal and rebuild what had been broken. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph, the words on the back, the way she had flinched when I pressed her in the kitchen. Forgiveness felt like a lie I would be telling myself, a way of pretending the cracks weren't there when they had already split the foundation wide open. Confrontation tempted me too, the idea of demanding every detail, every truth she had hidden. I wanted to shout, to force her to admit everything, to strip away the mask once and for all. But I feared what I might hear, feared that the truth would be even darker than what I already knew. And so I hesitated, caught between the need for answers and the terror of receiving them. Walking away seemed the simplest choice, yet it was also the hardest. To leave her would mean leaving behind not just the woman who had deceived me, but also the woman I had adored. It would mean letting go of the life we had built, the memories we had shared, the love that had once defined me. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to do that, or if I was too weak to stay. Each day, I felt myself unraveling further, torn between love and betrayal, between the past I cherished and the present I could no longer deny. The duality consumed me, leaving me restless, sleepless, and uncertain of who I was without her. I had built my identity around our marriage, and now that it was fractured, I didn't know where I ended and she began. Looking back, I realized the aftermath wasn't about the truth itself. It was about the choice it forced me to make. Forgive, confront, or walk away. Each path carried its own pain, its own cost, and none of them promised peace. I stood at the edge of that decision, paralyzed, knowing that whatever I chose would define not just the future of our marriage, but the future of who I would become. The road stretched out before me, empty and endless, the hum of the engine, the only sound filling the silence. I gripped the wheel tightly, the same way I had on that day when everything began to unravel. But this time, the seat beside me was empty. No soft laughter, no gentle humming to the radio, no warmth radiating from the woman I once believed was my anchor. The absence was louder than any words she could have spoken, and it pressed against me with every passing mile. I thought back to that first drive, how ordinary it had seemed, how safe and unshakable our love had felt. I remembered the sunlight on her face, the way her presence had made even the most mundane errands feel like treasures. Back then, I believed nothing could touch us, that our marriage was untouchable. Now, as I drove alone, I realized how fragile it had always been, how easily an illusion could shatter with just a few careless words. The photograph, the evasions, the cracks in her stories, they all replayed in my mind. But it was that single moment in the car that haunted me most. The way she had spoken so casually, so carelessly, revealing more than she intended. At the time, I had laughed it off, desperate to protect the picture I had painted of us. But now I saw it for what it was. The first fracture in the glass. The first sign that the life I adored was not what it seemed. The road blurred beneath me. But my thoughts were sharp, cutting through the memories I had once cherished. I realized that love, as powerful as it had been, had blinded me. I had adored her so completely that I refused to see the truth, even when it was right in front of me. And when the truth finally forced its way through, it left me hollow, stripped of the certainty I had once carried so proudly. I rolled down the window, letting the night air rush in, cold and biting. It felt cleansing in a way, as if the wind could strip away the remnants of the illusion I had clung to for so long. I knew I couldn't go back, couldn't rebuild what had been broken. The woman I thought I knew was gone, and in her place was someone I could no longer trust. The car became a mirror of my own solitude, a reflection of the journey I now faced alone. Where once it had been a cocoon of warmth and laughter, it was now a vessel of silence, carrying me forward into a future I hadn't chosen. I realized then that the drive itself was symbolic, an echo of the past, but also a reminder that I was moving on, whether I wanted to or not. Every mile carried me further from the man I had been, the man who believed in perfection, in unshakable love. That man had died the moment the illusion shattered, and in his place was someone harder, quieter, more cautious. I didn't know who I would become, but I knew I could never be the same. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating only a small stretch of road ahead. It struck me how fitting that was, how we never truly see the whole path, only the next few feet. I had thought I knew the road of my marriage, thought it stretched out smooth and certain, but I had been wrong. The truth had been waiting just beyond the reach of my headlights, and when it came into view, it changed everything. I drove on, the silence heavy but strangely freeing. For the first time, I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't clinging to illusions or painting over cracks. I was facing the truth, painful as it was, and in that truth there was a kind of clarity. The life I had adored was gone, but at least I could see it for what it truly was. And as the road stretched endlessly before me, I whispered the words that had been etched into my soul since that day. I adored my wife, but one day in the car, she unintentionally shattered the illusion, and nothing was ever the same again.